Across the entire world of combat aviation, there is one nation that lays claim to a legacy of air supremacy that neither ally nor adversary could even hope to match. That nation is, of course, the United States, a global superpower known for having built the fastest, the best armed, the most prolific, and the most advanced military aircraft in the world. From the undisputed king of the skies, the F-22 Raptor, to the cutting-edge F-35, to powerhouse aircraft like the B-2 Spirit and the F-15EX, America's claim to the skies is unparalleled. Or it was, until the events of December the 26th, 2024. On that day, the world received shocking news by way of the rising superpower nation of China. The news didn't come by an intelligence leak, nor by some grainy, out-of-focus photograph, nor by some boastful but unverifiable claim by the government itself. Instead, it came in a cascade, a deluge of photographs, audio recordings, and videos taken from in and around the city of Chengdu, all showing the same thing: a military aircraft unlike any known to be in the arsenal of any nation around the world across history. Tailless, clearly stealthy, and built in a way that suggests it's meant to serve as a fighter aircraft, the new jet looked, for all the world, like a so-called sixth-generation fighter. More advanced than the F-22, more advanced than the F-35, and more advanced than any other known combat aircraft on the planet. And today, we're going to take as close a look as we can at the aircraft known, albeit without confirmation, as the J-36. We're going to examine its companion, another previously undisclosed and seemingly advanced aircraft that appeared alongside it. We're going to explore and explain the implications of both aircraft as we dive into the broader status of what appears to be an air power renaissance in China. And finally, we'll take a look at the world's leading superpower to find out whether Uncle Sam can recover from the most crushing blow to its air dominance in over half a century. No, my videos on this channel dive deep into layers of war and politics because, let's face it, these topics, they're never black and white. But here's the problem. Most news sources, they're not giving you the full story. They're filtered through biases and agendas. And that's why I use today's sponsor, Ground News. It's an app and website that doesn't just show you the news, it breaks down how it's being reported across hundreds of sources worldwide. From their bias distribution to ownership insights, Ground News helps you step outside the echo chamber and see the full picture. Take Lebanon's recent election of General Joseph Aoun. Ground News let me compare 20+ sources, seeing how local and international outlets framed it differently. You'd be surprised how much perspective you gain when you question who's reporting and why they're doing it. And here's the best part. For a limited time, you can get Ground News' Unlimited Vantage plan for 40% off. It's just $5 a month. Go to ground.news/warfronts or scan the QR code on screen now to stay informed. It's really excellent. You won't regret it. Worth a try. And let's get back to today's episode. December the 26th is a very important day for the People's Republic of China. It's the birthday of Mao Zedong, founder of the Chinese Communist Party, revolutionary architect of the rise of the PRC, and totalitarian leader of his nation until his death in 1976. In China, his legacy is regarded as unimpeachable, truly spotless, a triumph of humanity and of what Mao insisted would become a great global power. Previous posthumous celebrations of Mao's birthday have included everything from the unveiling of statues and monuments to his legacy to nationwide festivals and revelry. But this year, on what would have been Chairman Mao's 131st birthday, China and the world witnessed a tribute of a very different kind. The videos and images surfaced out of the Chinese city of Chengdu, the country's fourth most populous city at 20 million inhabitants, and the home of the Chengdu Aircraft Corporation, or CAC. The CAC has been responsible for a number of notable military aircraft across modern Chinese history, and most recently its claim to fame is the J-20, the first highly advanced fifth-generation fighter aircraft to enter military service anywhere outside of the US. As a result, the people of Chengdu are not exactly unaccustomed to the overflight of new and highly sophisticated aircraft over their heads, but what they saw on Mao's 131st went well beyond anything they had seen before. Flying out in broad daylight, low to the ground and over urban areas, the strange flying triangle above Chengdu was clearly meant to be seen. The aircraft was tailless, with broad sweeping wings that seemed to take a double delta formation, hugging in close to the body near the front half of the fuselage before sweeping out to a rear section reminiscent of the tail feathers of a bird of prey. It was clearly devoid of sharp 90-degree angles in a telltale sign of an aircraft meant to be stealthy to radar. It featured not one engine, not two, but three, with one air intake on top and two alongside the fuselage. It was loud, it was highly imposing in flight, and it was big, something we know because of the aircraft flying alongside it. In some videos and still images of the aircraft, it was followed by a J-20 chase plane, believed to be a twin-seater aircraft, the J-20S. But in others, it was accompanied by a second aircraft that bore no resemblance to anything known to be in China's arsenal. Also tailless, clearly built with stealth features in mind, the smaller aircraft moved quickly through the skies on backswept wings, powered by what appeared to be twin engines. According to unconfirmed reports out of China, this aircraft may be a product of the Chengdu Aircraft Corporation's main rival under the CCP, the Shenyang Aircraft Corporation, responsible for its own fifth-generation fighter, the J-35. It was followed by what appeared to be a Shenyang-made chase plane, and its role as an apparent medium-weight aircraft would be more in line with what Shenyang has been working on recently, as opposed to the heavier Chengdu design that mirrors the heavy J-20 that Chengdu is responsible for. The second aircraft, the likely Shenyang-made one, wasn't pictured in any photographs or videos that granted a clear look at its cockpit, leaving open the possibility that it may either be a drone or an optionally manned aircraft rather than a dedicated manned fighter plane. Neither of the aircraft pictured that day have been formally acknowledged by China, but given the manner in which they were displayed to the nation, it appears all but certain that the word was meant to get out. Flying over residential neighborhoods on a cloudless day, it was practically assured that Chengdu's many residents would capture video and photos, and that those bits of media would quickly escape the insular bubble that is the Chinese internet. As expected, they quickly made it to the global west and into the headlines of both major news sites and dedicated flight-focused outlets. In a telling indicator of what China had hoped to achieve, very little, if any, of the content its citizens shared would be censored. Chairman Mao's birthday gift was apparently not just a couple of new fighters, but a show of Chinese military might directed at the entire world. Now, we'll be bridging into a closer analysis of these two aircraft shortly, but before we do, it is worth taking a moment and putting this big reveal in context. Although news of China's rapid aerospace developments doesn't tend to make the front page in other nations, unless, of course, China's unveiling what looks like a hyper-advanced fighter jet, the country has realized major advancements in the realm of military aviation. Recently, images circulated of what's thought to be China's new KJ-3000, an advanced early warning and control aircraft that's meant to confer broad battlefield awareness to a nation that can use it. This is a critical element of advanced modern air forces, and the KJ-3000 is believed to be a step above anything China currently flies. Other recent video caught the first known images of what's thought to be a twin-boom unmanned drone called the Wuzhen 9, reportedly designed to detect stealth aircraft. China recently launched an extra-large amphibious assault ship named the Sichuan, featuring an electromagnetic catapult and arresting gear that may allow it to launch drones or even fighter aircraft. It's showed off major design updates to its collaborative combat aircraft, a planned loyal wingman drone meant to fly alongside fighter aircraft, and disclosed that 4 years ago it flew a large aircraft at over 6.5 times the speed of sound. At November's Zhuhai Air Show, China showed off its J-35A, its second fifth-generation fighter, as well as a mock-up of a sixth-generation jet fighter called the White Emperor. On January the 6th of 2025, images on Chinese social media even showed a large aircraft that may be China's secretive H-20 stealth bomber, flying at altitudes that indicate that unlike these two other designs, China's not ready for the world to get a close look. Even by themselves, each of those developments involved the sorts of tech that would force the US, the EU, and other nations trying to keep pace or stay ahead of China to stop and take notice. But add all of them together, and it's been abundantly clear to those who've been watching closely that China is placing a strong focus on military aerospace development. Now, there is, of course, the caveat that most of these claims have yet to be verified beyond statements from the CCP, but the emergence of multiple, secret, seemingly highly advanced aircraft flying over Chengdu puts the entire situation into perspective. Even if not all of China's claims ultimately reflect reality, we now know that every single one of them was made by a nation that could put these strange things into the sky, so if that's possible, what else might be? Now, As we take a closer look at these two aircraft designs, we've got to begin with a caveat. Outside the very tightly controlled doors of the Chinese defense industrial complex, nobody on Earth is known to have studied these aircraft directly. Because of their secretive status and the fact that they have yet to be formally acknowledged by China, we don't even have access to state-provided figures on their performance or information about their internal capabilities, let alone external verification. For context, the true capabilities and performance metrics of China's J-20 fighter are entirely unknown in the public domain, and that aircraft first entered service all the way back in 2017. The same could be said for America's F-22 and Russia's Su-57, although the F-35 has been proliferated far more extensively around the world and observed quite a bit more often. As a result, we're not going to be able to present any concrete statistics on flight performance, onboard technology, or battlefield capabilities on either of these new Chinese aircraft. But what we can do is to draw on the analysis of a range of aerospace experts who've used the footage and imagery available to conduct at least a superficial set of conclusions about their design and their likely intent as battlefield implements. And we'll start with the bigger of the two planes, the likely Chengdu aerospace product that caught the bulk of global headlines. The first thing to note about the aircraft is also the most obvious: its lack of any tail. The aircraft is what's referred to as a modified delta wing, with wide, sloping wings that appear to blend into the body. That body appears to be borrowed, at least in part, from Chengdu's J-20 fighter, a conclusion reached due to clear similarities in the underbelly of both aircraft. The plane appears to be confirmation of something that Western intelligence has suggested for some time, that China's been devoting substantial resources to figuring out how to develop and operate roughly diamond-shaped tailless aircraft. Such a design is advantageous, mostly because of its effects on the aircraft's radar signature, making its radar return far smaller than those of current fifth-generation fighters. The plane lacks vertical stabilizers, the upright or sloped tail fins that the vast majority of modern combat aircraft have as part of their tail, in a decision that probably compromises the aircraft's maneuverability at least somewhat. But what it also does is to overcome a lasting deficit shared by the most advanced warplanes in operation around the world. While the J-20, the F-35, or the F-22 are very stealthy when viewed from the front, they're less stealthy when they're caught on radar from the sides or the rear. A smooth, tailless design like this new aircraft, not quite a flying wing but something close to it, will massively benefit the aircraft's radar return when viewed on radar from all angles. The aircraft features other clear, stealthy elements, including overall contours of its wings and fuselage that mirror the shaping of other stealth aircraft, and top-mounted engine exhausts that will dramatically reduce the plane's infrared signature when viewed from the ground. It's not clear how stealthy this aircraft really is, seeing as nobody outside of the closed circle of the CCP would have been able to hit it with radar, but it's possible that it'll be an order of magnitude more stealthy than the J-20 after accounting for so many deficiencies in the J-20's design. China claims that the J-20 stealth is directly comparable to the F-22 and the F-35, although, again, verification of that is lacking. Aside from its radar return, the tailless delta wing design should have a notable impact on the plane's aerodynamics. Almost certainly, it uses a sophisticated onboard computer to translate its pilot's control inputs into instructions, since the flight controls of an aircraft like this are very different, even counterintuitive, when compared to what's usually required of a pilot flying an advanced fighter. The design should grant the aircraft significant reductions in drag, possibly corresponding to higher top speeds and cruising speeds. In order to compensate for maneuverability problems inherent to a tailless design, the plane features 5 so-called control surfaces on the back edge of each of its 2 wings, with these little flaps intended to bring much of that maneuverability back. There are several other control surfaces on different parts of the aircraft for a total of 18, although the degree to which each of them can wiggle around is unclear. From the question of maneuverability, we come to its unique 3-engine design, with one air intake that seems to be placed on top of the fuselage and 2 others on opposite sides of the underbelly. There are a few possible reasons that China might have opted for such a design, with the most obvious answer being to simply provide more thrust and thus be able to push greater overall weight through the air. It's also possible that not all of the 3 engines would serve the same functionality or be meant to operate all at once. One may have some sort of burst function, for example, or be intended as a backup if the engines China's used are known to be unreliable. There's some speculation that the 3rd engine could provide a hypersonic scramjet function, but that prospect is pretty unlikely based on the understanding of scramjets currently available in the public domain. Currently, the plane is thought to use the same WS-10C turbofan engine as the J-20, although the J-20's engines are soon to be swapped out for what's supposed to be a much more powerful replacement, the WS-15. That WS-15 will offer greatly improved fuel efficiency, range, maneuverability, reliability, and more, according to China, and it's likely that this new aircraft would be instead to incorporate them instead of relying on something less capable. As far as Western analysts can tell from the available imagery, this new aircraft doesn't appear to have thrust vectoring nozzles, a specialized type of engine nozzle that can adjust the angle of thrust output in order to send the plane veering off in different directions. The current engines may have some modest thrust vectoring capability, but they don't seem to offer what Russia's Sukhoi fighters do, for example. It's an interesting feature to have been left out, since thrust vectoring is one way to compensate for the maneuverability limitations of tailless designs. And then there's the other most notable thing about this aircraft, and that's its size. Now, it's difficult, if not impossible, to get exact measurements on this new design, but it appears to be roughly as long as the J-20 with a significantly broadened fuselage. Starting with the nose, the frontward portion of the aircraft is wide enough that it could probably provide side-by-side seating for 2 crew members, although direct shots of the canopy are lacking at this time. The mere fact that it can squeeze 2 seats in doesn't necessarily mean that it would. In fact, it's entirely possible that the aircraft is a single-seater or a typical 2-seater with a pilot in front and a second person in back. For that matter, it could have an entirely different design, 1 seat in front and 2 behind, although the functionality of such a setup would be anybody's guess. Also, on the nose of the aircraft, while we're there, analysts have observed 2 distinct apertures or openings on either side. One appears to mount a side-looking airborne radar array, potentially providing a much more expansive radar range than most fighter aircraft would be equipped with, and granting the plane unique tactical opportunities in combat. The other appears to be a radio sensor of some kind. Moving rearward, the plane is believed to have internal weapons bays, a critical feature of properly stealthy aircraft, and its large size suggests a significantly better fuel capacity than the J-20. With more fuel and more room for weapons comes the ability to fly further, carry heavier payloads, and burst or sustain flight at higher speeds, especially at high altitudes. The fuselage irregularities that indicate an internal weapons bay suggest that it will be deeper and longer than that of the J-20. As for what it could carry, that's anybody's guess, but expert opinions on the aircraft's intended purpose tend to broadly agree that at the very least, it's meant to be a long-range heavyweight fighter aircraft similar to the American F-15 or the Russian Su-30. It could also be intended as a medium-range bomber, thus featuring an even longer range. We should note, however, that when it comes to the most advanced combat aircraft designs around the world, the distinction between a fighter and a bomber is a lot less meaningful than it used to be, with hyper-advanced aircraft that would traditionally be described as bombers being able to perform most functions of a fighter aircraft and vice versa. The close-range dogfighting maneuverability of a light fighter aircraft starts to matter a whole lot less when cutting-edge designs can see and engage targets for hundreds of kilometers while remaining invisible and controlling a fleet of manned and unmanned companion aircraft. And while we're issuing clarifications, it's perfect time to bring up one major caveat that applies to both this aircraft and the second, smaller design that we're about to discuss. If you were familiar with this story before watching our episode today, well, firstly, congratulations, you're a nerd like us, but secondly, you would have almost certainly seen these aircraft referred to as 6th-generation fighters, when in reality, such a classification is premature. There's the overarching reality to consider here, that fighter aircraft generations, they're an arbitrary invention of the defense analysis world with no universally agreed standard for what defines an aircraft of a certain generation. Sure, these aircraft might be 6th-generation fighters, but my shirt could also be a 6th-generation fighter if a given expert's arbitrary criteria are inclusive enough. It's a nice shirt, but it's not a fighter. Beyond the theoretical, there's also the more practical concern that by any of the widely accepted definitions, a 6th-generation fighter would also have to include a lot more than just a slick-looking stealthy exterior. These sorts of aircraft are generally understood to include sophisticated AI and data fusion, battlefield command and control technologies, unmanned drone wingmen, and all sorts of other super advanced bells and whistles. In this case, however, we've got absolutely no way to tell whether any of that hardware or software was a part of either aircraft. And now we'll pivot to this other smaller aircraft, where although we've got fewer images and videos of lower quality to work with, we've still got enough to draw a few conclusions. This aircraft, likely the Shenyang Aircraft Corporation product, was a good deal smaller than the Chengdu one. It appears to more obviously be a tactical aircraft of some kind, likely with a range that's a good deal more modest and a payload capacity that would allow for far fewer onboard weapons. This aircraft is a twin-engine design fed by highly angular air intakes on either side of the underbelly, and analysts have identified another feature between the engines, although its function is not currently known. Its design suggests that it too would boast a very small radar cross-section, and like the Chengdu design, it doesn't include any vertical stabilizers or other tail features. There's not quite as much documentation of whatever control services it may rely on compared to the Chengdu aircraft. Unfortunately, we can't ascertain much more about this second aircraft based on the images and documents available, although what we've described just now is enough to put it on par with the most advanced known aircraft designs on Earth. With the general outline of these two aircraft now in at least something of a better view, it's time to talk about what they mean, both for China's military-industrial might and for the rest of the world. Again, there are limits to the conclusions that we can draw here, owing to the fact that we still know very little about these aircraft other than the simple fact that, well, they exist. But at a minimum, their presence offers a fundamental challenge to the world's prior understanding of China's advanced tactical air arsenal, with very real implications both on Chinese soil and abroad. The aircraft tell us a few important bits of information about China, but perhaps most important of all is the sheer ambition involved in designing and building them. These are not the first tailless aircraft to fly, just see America's B-2 and B-21 stealth bombers. But they are the first tailless aircraft believed to operate in a fighter jet role, something that even the United States isn't on record having built. Not only that, but for China to make the leap to their first tailless aircraft indicates the broader state of their aerospace industry, that there is ample time and resources to take risks, explore new technologies, and flesh out the issues involved with making them work. The institutional will is there, the technical expertise is there, and the manufacturing capacity, well, that's there too. Moreover, these aircraft do not appear as if they'll be subject to the same accusations of intellectual property theft as China's fifth-generation fighters, regarded by some analysts as byproducts of intelligence theft many years ago. At most, the larger Chengdu design might share a common base fuselage and engines with the J-20, but everything else about the design appears to be indigenously engineered, to say nothing of the smaller Shenyang design, which doesn't resemble anything in the known air arsenals of any other world nation. Whatever these aircraft may or may not have going on under the surface, the mere fact that China designed and produced airworthy copies is a major statement in itself. And then there are the global implications. Even without assuming anything about the technological or performance features of either of these aircraft, we know that China has managed to cross engineering benchmarks of fighter design that competitors like Russia or India almost certainly haven't crossed yet. It's more difficult to measure China relative to nations that are known to have sixth-generation fighters in development, like America's Next-Generation Air Dominance Program, or NGAD, or the collaborative sixth-generation projects underway via Italy, Japan, and the UK, in one example, and France, Germany, and Spain in the other. To be clear, Russia and a couple of other nations do claim to also have sixth-generation fighters in development, but it's unclear whether there's any truth to those assertions, whereas those other three Western programs are more concrete. And although it's unclear whether those programs have designed or flown an aircraft of this design, we do know that China was the first to publicly reveal what they'd built, immediately granting a pretty major public relations victory. The fact that China's got a sophisticated aerospace design capability isn't a surprise to the West, but the idea that they could build and test not one, but two aircraft this advanced and be confident enough to fly them around in public without anyone seeming to know beforehand is a major statement on just how far China has progressed relative to the competition. And not only that, but these flights lend legitimacy to a variety of China's other claims about its capabilities. And if you treat those claims seriously, instead of just laughing them off as if they were Russian vaporware, then you'd reach the obvious conclusion that China's aerospace programs are a good deal ahead of where they were previously thought to be. Existing estimates on where various Chinese initiatives are at, from the anticipated H-20 stealth bomber to the JHXS regional fighter bomber to its more sophisticated drone designs, it will probably all need updating. That in turn requires strategic recalibration by nations that may become China's adversaries. It requires re-evaluation of their own spending and technological priorities, and it's an open and obvious invitation to what could quickly turn into a sixth-generation arms race. Of course, it wouldn't be right to consider such optimistic views of China's new aircraft if we didn't also take a moment to put on our skeptics' hats. There are, of course, alternative explanations for the aircraft that showed up over the city of Chengdu, so let's run through them quickly. One thing that the aircraft probably aren't would be some sort of AI disinformation campaign. Not only would the AI used for the deception have to be pretty damn sophisticated, but disseminating it would have involved a large-scale effort to provide these AI clips and images to known sources working with journalists, as well as an intensive effort to design an aircraft that aerospace experts would look at and know was legitimate, despite its clear sophistication. So, assuming that it is indeed a real aircraft, neither the Shenyang nor the Chengdu designs are likely to be purpose-built just to distract or worry the international community. After all, if you're going to put that much effort into a flying distraction that makes a believable tailless stealthy aircraft, then you might as well design an actual tailless stealthy aircraft with some sort of combat functionality. A more believable alternative, however, is that either or both of the designs could be technology demonstrators, either for aircraft that have since matured into different forms or for programs that have since been discontinued. If true, and if China happened to have a couple of flyable demonstrators or prototypes lying around, then flying them in front of the entire world would make for a valuable act of misdirection, forcing global adversaries to respond to one design while actually working on another. But regardless of whether or not these two aircrafts are put into mainline production, their global reveal has sent shockwaves across the world, and in particular to the United States. And it's here that we've got to draw what may be the most damning comparison of all between these new designs and America's 6th-generation NGAD program. Very recently, at the end of 2024, the NGAD program suffered a major setback, taking a pause for internal review by the US Air Force while the nation evaluated whether or not the program on its current course was even worth pursuing. The Air Force's review did come back positive for the NGAD, according to Breaking Defense, meaning that the Air Force has recommended to America's incoming Trump administration that the US pushes ahead with developing a next-generation manned fighter. But the contrast with China, despite the verdict, could not be more stark. Here's Beijing flying aircraft that the world did not know existed out in public for a global reveal, while the country's primary adversary takes months to decide whether to scrap its entire program after a decade of hard work and simply start from scratch. But that telling of events is only half the story here, because although China's new revelations do constitute a great leap forward, that's a Mao pun, yes we did, they don't indicate that America has been shown up yet. The NGAD program is widely understood to have produced at least 3 flying prototypes already, years ago in fact, and it's believed to have already facilitated the development of a range of relevant technologies during the push to complete a production-ready version. Although it's not known for sure, both of these Chinese aircraft are believed to have taken their first flights just months, if not weeks prior to their big reveal, and if true, that would indicate that they're still several years behind the US on the basis of simple airworthiness. That's without knowing whether China has produced working versions of any of the requisite technologies for a next-generation aircraft, and it's here that the more important competition is probably taking place. Let's say that the reporting about these Chinese aircraft is wrong, and that they actually took their first flight 6 full years ago, multiple years ahead of the NGAD prototypes. If that's true, then it's very impressive, but if the AI systems, the data fusion technology, the battlefield command and control capabilities, and the other onboard systems are a decade behind what the US is producing, then the only advantage China actually has is that it's got a cool-looking flying machine. I mean, it's not nothing, but it's not a meaningful advantage in the overall race to new fighter technology. Of course, the opposite could also be true, and China could be leaps and bounds ahead of America technologically. There is just no way to know, since neither nation appears eager to publish a full breakdown on their cutting-edge fighter technology. It's disappointing, we know. One lingering open question around these Chinese aircraft actually has more to do with the NGAD than the Chinese aircraft themselves, specifically the question of America's response. The potential rethink of the NGAD program had some to do with technology and development concerns, but a lot more to do with budgetary constraints that, if erased with a magic wand tomorrow, could clear the way to a much more rapid pace for the program. The incoming Trump administration has already signaled an interest in funding surges toward defense, and now, with the added motivation of two scary, unexplained Chinese aircraft to think about, American legislators and policymakers might be substantially more willing to allocate funds to the NGAD if it means reclaiming or preserving whatever technological advantage America still has. And it is here that we come to the final question of this episode. Did China just give America a foxbat moment? And bear with us here for a very quick history lesson that winds the clock back to the Cold War. Once upon a time, America was working on a Mach 3 capable bomber, the B-70 Valkyrie, that was supposed to fly fast and high enough that it couldn't be stopped by Soviet air defenses. While it was in development, Soviet air defenses got better, to the point that flying high and fast without stealth might not be enough. But the Soviets were hard at work on more than just static air defenses. America learned about a new plane that was under development, purportedly fast and powerful enough to intercept the Valkyrie and shoot it down. That plane, heavily propagandized by the Soviets, would eventually be designated the MiG-25 and referred to in NATO nations as the Foxbat. Now, in reality, the Foxbat wasn't quite as impressive as it was made out to be, but America didn't know that at the time. Instead, America was reacting to what they thought was going to be an absolutely terrifying aircraft to stand against, and in response, they produced what's widely hailed as the greatest combat aircraft of its generation, the F-15 Eagle. When the US finally got its hands on a MiG-25, they discovered that what they'd been so afraid of was actually a dangerous-to-fly, very niche interceptor aircraft, while what they'd built in response was a high-powered, high-performance, highly versatile beast that could all but guarantee air supremacy in a range of environments. The Soviets talked a big talk. America took the Soviets at their word, and in the end, America produced something far more impressive than the Soviet aircraft ever was. So, fast forward again to today, and we'll ask it again. Is China's big reveal of these two new aircraft a 21st century Foxbat moment? And just as importantly, whose Foxbat moment is it? Is this a moment when the United States, caught off guard by flying machines that could be anything from empty shells to production-ready 6th-gen fighters, goes into overdrive and responds with an aircraft to beat the most dangerous possible version of these planes? Or have we witnessed the conclusion of an effort in China that might have started with a Foxbat moment long ago, seeing advanced American fighters and realizing that it was of the utmost importance to catch up? Perhaps when this story is told in the history books, it'll be clear that neither nation saw this as a Foxbat moment in reality, but more likely, they both did. And when you have two global powers scrambling at breakneck speeds to respond and counter technological capabilities that each fear the other is developing, you have an arms race. Did China checkmate America's 6th-gen fighter program? No, probably not. Does America retain a dominant edge in its fighter aircraft technology? Probably not. But if either of these two nations had any illusions before now about just what sort of competition they're mutually engaged in, then they should have no doubt anymore. The space race, the push to ICBMs, these things went out of fashion a long time ago. The 6th-gen fighters, they're our arms race now. And that arms race is just getting started.